My name is Scott King. I am the president-elect of the Nebraska Association of Teachers of Science. For those of you who don't know, I am super excited to be hosting this virtual conference series that we created this year amid all this chaos and uncertainty that's been going on, and to help give teachers something to latch on to as they start thinking about how to improve their practice for next year. This week, we have an amazing panel of speakers from all across the nation. Today, we have our first one, the TJ McKenna, who is phenomenal, pun intended, talking to you about engaging and accessible phenomenon for all. I'll let TJ do more of an introduction, but just a couple of quick housekeeping things to deal with. After your name, it's always nice. We can kind of have an idea who we're talking to. If you guys would put your state and your grade level. We do have about 165 people from across the country who have registered, the vast majority of which, over 100, are from Nebraska. And we will have up to 100 people in this session today. So I'm super excited about the reach that we have. We even should have somebody from Mexico joining us, so that'll be awesome. Just for feedback issues, if you guys leave your mics muted, that'd be great. We don't get the echoes in the other situations. And it's always great to see your lovely faces, but if you're having bandwidth issues, feel free to turn off your microphone, or sorry, your camera, so that might help a little bit. Some norms as we go through our sessions here. We are here voluntarily for the good of our students, and just keep that in mind. Nobody was forcing you to be here. You guys all chose to be here. And I think that's amazing and definitely worth recognizing and respecting. Everyone's ideas are important and valid. So your ideas for phenomenon or how to approach them for students, they are important and they are valid, and we do want to hear what those are. Share your information, your knowledge, and your expertise in our chat. We have a couple of board members who will be helping to monitor that. Any notes that are out there, and also with your voice, feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions as things go on. Please exhibit professional behavior as we go through this. And then we want to be like a proton and stay positive. There's my science joke for you. So at that, I'm going to turn off my share. And if I can figure out how to do that now.
Well, you stopped your sharing, Scott. Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
I believe I should be able to share my screen now, so we'll see. All right. Today, one of the things I want to talk about is really focusing, and it kind of works out, like you have put together a great panel, but when we're thinking about NGSS and phenomena-based learning, like what do we want to start with? We want to start with the phenomenon or the phenomena that we're trying to figure out. I thought it'd be a good thing to start with just thinking about engaging an accessible phenomena for all learners. I go back and forth on like how much time we really want to focus on the current situation, and that we're trying to engage, a lot of us are trying to engage our students via distance learning, and we're trying to engage the learners that we have at our house that are trying to do science at the same time. And so we'll try to touch on both of those as I go forward. I'm from Boston University. I have a dual appointment in the program of science education as well as elementary education. And I teach elementary methods, science methods, and secondary science methods. A little bit about me. So I was always into science. I was always into critters. I told my mom when I was 5 that I wanted to study animal behavior because we had all sorts of animals at our house. And I was like, I just want to know what they're thinking about. And I remember her laughing and saying, that's not a job. You can't do that. You have to be a teacher like me. And so I was like, oh, okay. And so I went to school to be a high school bio teacher. And then around the second year in my undergrad, I met an animal behaviorist. And I was like, oh my God, like that's what I said. That's what I wanted. And she had studied at Harvard. and she was doing this really interesting study around tree squirrels. And I was intrigued, and she had shared that they do this weird thing where if there are potential cache robbers near them, somebody that's going to steal whatever they bury, they go out of their way to like fake you out. Like they'll dig a hole, they'll pretend to take it out of their mouth and put nothing in the hole and bury it and then run off and hide it somewhere else. And so I was really intrigued by that, and asked her, like, that's cool. Like, why do they do that? And she said, we don't know. And it was like the first moment where I was like, wait, like this brilliant Harvard trained behaviorist, you know, she's got a PhD, she's working on something she doesn't know. And so I think that was the first switch for me, that like my whole life I had been like learning about the science that people had already figured out and already put in books. And like, here is this person, the first person I met in college, who was like trying to use science to figure things out in the world that we didn't yet understand. And so I was hooked. I got into it. The interesting thing was she had the people that were burying, you know, grad students, of course, but the people that were giving the nuts to the squirrel, we were using peanuts, were also the same people that were digging it up. And so when I came to view this experiment in progress, I could see the squirrels were like, wait, like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, they're giving us stuff for free, and then they're wasting their energy to go dig it up again. And so for me, I'm a huge fan of the cross-cutting concepts. And that was like thinking through an evolutionary lens. That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would somebody give you something for free and then waste their time and energy to go dig it up? And so we were able to publish this. We changed that. We had givers, we had only stealers. The squirrels used to run around and bark at the people that would rob from them. And so it became a pretty funny study, published in this journal. And then I couldn't even access it. It was behind a paywall. And so it was like one of those moments where, okay, so we did all this great work. Is anybody going to see it? And luckily, The Most Extreme on Animal Planet came out and filmed and told this story. And so from that, I moved into a number of different things. I ran live exhibits for a number of different years, was an aquarist. You know, we had everything, snakes and lizards, and my master's degree is in entomology. That's why I've got all this dead stuff behind me. And then I started doing a lot of television. And so trying to do some TV work that shares what I was thinking about. But I always said I tried to be the anti-Bill Nye. Like, I didn't want to give it away. And so trying to put some things on TV that were things that teachers could use. And then on the bottom right, I started shifting into thinking about how do we move this into classrooms. And so I did a lot of professional development and am a national trainer for facilitators on the NGSX, the Next Generation Science Exemplars Project. And so it was through that I noticed a lot of teachers would get to a point in their learning about the new Next Generation Science standards or the vision and the framework, and they would all Google NGSS phenomena, and like not a lot was coming up. And this is maybe 7 years ago now. And so it was one of those moments where I was feeling like, well, somebody's probably working on this, right? Like, it's not just, you know, aren't smart people out in the world solving all of these issues. And every time we would Google it, nothing would come up. And so it was literally during a lunch, during a professional development session, that I started ngssphenomena.com and just started putting ideas out there. And I always share that this site probably doesn't have the perfect one for you or your students, but I like it to be a resource that's free, that gets people thinking about, oh, maybe I might do something like that, or it at least gets the juices flowing on some different options. But one of the biggest questions is like, what do we mean when we say phenomena, you know, plural, or phenomenon, singular? Is like, it's got to be something that is intriguing. It kind of captures your thinking and it makes you want to go deeper. And so, you know, in here you see the swimmer, like the water tension hasn't broken yet. People were sharing this coyote and this badger that they were saying, why isn't the coyote eating the badger? But people don't realize that they you know, actually work together when they're hunting. Bottom left, there's a rock that we found on Earth that's like way older than not only just the Earth, but also our sun. So like, how does that happen? How did that get on the Earth? And so when we say phenomena, it doesn't need to be phenomenal. It needs to be something that drives the learning. And that's going to differ based on age range, grade level, and your situation. Especially now thinking virtually, like our ecosystems have shrunk. We're staying in our social distanced areas. And so that's going to change the phenomena that we have that's accessible to us. And so I always think of when you're trying to think about something, you got to go back to the framework. And so I think of those little jelly bracelets that in my mind would say, what does the framework say? WDTFS. And so going back to the framework and thinking about phenomena, children are born investigators. And so we know that like kids do experiments even when they can't talk yet. I think everyone's seen a baby in a high chair take something off their plate, a little Cheerio, hold it over the edge and drop it. And they see it go down and bounce off the ground and like, like it didn't go up, it didn't hover there, it goes down. Let me see if I can replicate. They do that again. They see, wow, it goes down almost every time. And like mom comes over and gets it, puts it back. Like, so my behavior has an impact on somebody else. And so really staying with that young children can investigate and highlighting those why questions and how did that happen and what is this? And really the goal, these are quotes right from the framework, our goal of science is to develop a set of coherent and consistent theoretical descriptions of the world, and the key being about a wide range of phenomena. And so we really don't want to focus on just one thing. We want to be able to expand that to be able to try to figure out things in the world that are meaningful to us. And so what does it mean to learn science? Knowing, using, interpreting scientific explanations of the natural world. We're all flooded now with all sorts of data and explanations for everything that's happening. So like, how do we work with those? Generating, evaluating scientific evidence and explanations. We're always trying to go out and find evidence that we could use to back up some of our explanations or our arguments or the things that that we think are causing whatever the phenomenon is that we're trying to explain. Understanding the nature and development of scientific knowledge. This is really in the K-12 progression. Like we really need to do science to then understand how messy it gets and how we're building progressively more complex explanations in the world. And then participating productively in scientific practices and discourse. I think while I'm not talking about academically productive talk, like that is such a huge piece. Like the ones that are doing the talking are often the ones doing the learning. And so the more that we can be part of that discourse, the more that we can have a knowledge building classroom community that's trying to work together to try to explain something big and complex, the more that we're going to create science learners that can go out and be great citizens, science citizens later in their lives. So what does it mean to learn science? It's about a system of thought, discourse, and practice. And so, like I just said, in this knowledge building community, we want all of these to be connected and social. Like science is a social endeavor. I cringe a little bit when I see all of the posts about, Newtonian physics was discovered while, one person was sitting home alone. Like that's not going to be the thing that happens for everybody. That is a very rare occurrence. And so science is social. It wasn't until that was shared for other people to critique and think about Newtonian physics to then say like, wow, that does hold up to all these different phenomena we see in the world, and all working towards the goal of understanding important scientific ideas. And so this really stresses how we need to be able to develop explanations of phenomena and then do investigations to help us develop or evaluate those claims. And so we're in this constant cycle of this system where we're trying to ask questions, do something, gather evidence, try to figure out, does that still hold up? Does my explanation hold up? Do I go back to my model and add these new elements over and over? And that's happening within a grade, within a unit, but then across units K-12. And this really highlights the fact that science learning is a cultural accomplishment. So, we as educators really get to help define what counts as learning and what types of knowledge are seen as important, because we are part of that community. And seeing science as a culturally mediated way of thinking and knowing really helps us think back to the practices. Like, what do we value as a community, and how do we value other communities that are bringing their knowledge into bear with everything that we're trying to do. I mentioned the cross-cutting concepts. They are extremely important when you're thinking about equitable sense making, because you only get so far when you're thinking about the practices. If you're saying developing a model or obtaining, evaluating, communicating information, like, they are called practices because we need to practice them to get better. And so it was a specific move away from thinking about inquiry, because inquiry just had so many different definitions for so many different people. So some people thought that it was just hands-on, give people a bunch of materials and see what they can figure out. Or others thought that, you had to do your shared understandings phase, where at the end, once everybody had done their investigation, everyone's clapping, but people weren't really listening. You weren't truly sharing the understanding from the investigation that somebody else had done if you didn't do it yourself. And so the cross-cutting concepts are a way of thinking about equitable sense making, but also using them as a lens to dig deeper. And so sometimes, a student might see something happening and not have any idea about, like, I'm not sure what question to ask about that. But if you say, well, let's think about cause and effect. Is this a cause and effect thing? What might be the cause that's causing the thing that we're seeing that happens? And so that gives them a tool. It's, we think about it as epistemic tools, or tools that extend your ability to work at knowing more about what's happening. So much like a hammer, you have a hammer, now you can hit a nail into a piece of wood. Without the hammer, you're going to hurt your hand. And so thinking of the cross-cutting concepts as our way to dig deeper and make sense of our own natural engineered world, and moving past just like structured classroom phenomena, or very slow moving demos, or demos where, we as the teacher demo it and then the students have to go do the lab to confirm that what we said is right. And so I edited the quote a little bit. I'm going to have to science the business out of this. But thinking of, like, all right, so I'm in a hard situation. I need to use science to somehow get me out of this, get me out of the mud. So I want to pause for a second. And so this is a phenomenon that we shared on the NGSS Phenomena Twitter, just at NGSS Phenomena. And the trail cam snapped a photo of a possum eating ticks off of a willing deer's head. And this was captured in Vermont. And it says possums can eat up to 5,000 ticks in a 2 to 3 month period and are resistant to rabies due to their low body temperature. And so if I change this so I can see the chat, I'd love to see what people are thinking about this. Like, throw some questions out there. And maybe Scott, if you can see the questions, you can share them. But what does this make you think of? There's a deer, there's a possum on like a rock, and the possum's eating ticks off of its head. All right, I can see it.
You got them?
It's just, do the ticks taste good? Symbiotic relationships. What attracted the deer to the possum? How did they find each other? Sounds like a Disney movie, right? What kind of teeth do possums have? Yeah, like, how do you even bite a tick? Will the ticks make the possum sick? How does low body temperature protect from rabies? That's a great question. What nutritional value is there in a tick? Yeah. like cleaner shrimp. Have these animals done this before? So I'd like to highlight this example because it's something that seems so random. Are ticks sweet? Does a deer do something for the possum? Yeah, it's like, does this technically count as a symbiotic, or is this just like a buffet, a tick buffet on this head? And I know deer have tricky hands. Why is a deer letting the possum do this? Why are the possum populations sizes in areas with larger tick populations? So just looking at the questions that we've started throwing out there, I'm already seeing things about like scale and patterns, and thinking through the cross-cutting concepts. Like, is this if a possum can eat 5,000 ticks, how many ticks are really on deer? And is it easier to get them off the deer? How many areas are there even where there is this spot where the possum can reach the head of the deer? And so I could see starting a unit with this if I was thinking about ecosystem dynamics and thinking about, well, okay, how many possums do we need? Wait, how many ticks are there? Wait, like how many deer are there? And how could we build this over the course of, what else do we need to know? And so this really gets us into thinking about starting with asking questions, but almost immediately we have a bunch of ideas about more information we need to obtain, models that we need to make about tick populations going up and down in different times of the year. I think we need to know about body temperature in terms of the possum and what does that have to do? And like, I need a nutritional value of a tick. Is that information out there? And like, how would we even decide what, if that information is correct or not? Like what, and then we have to multiply it times 5,000. How many possums, what else do they eat? So an example for people to start thinking about like what else is out there. And same thing with a lot of people share phenomena to this because I definitely don't have all the ideas. And so people share cool stuff that they're thinking about, which we can use. I like that one too from Carrie. Are possums also unaffected by Lyme disease? I sure would hope so, with 5,000 that they're eating. So I want to shift slightly to a different example. And so this example is one that with people have been asking for more resources around these. And so with the ticks and the possums, you might look at that and think like, huh, that's weird. But like, what do I do with that? How do I start a unit around that? Or is that more of a lesson level phenomenon working towards a larger thing that we're trying to explain? And so a colleague, Chris Zeminski, and I, who work on the site, started thinking through and sharing some of our thinking about different phenomena. And so this one is thinking about bees. And I've never ran a beehive, but I've seen bees. And I found this picture on the left. And the picture on the left is a beehive where the person forgot to put in, and I don't even know what any of these things are called, but the wood slats. So like they're normally supposed to look like it looks on the right, and they forgot. And so, but the bees were still in the hive. And so when they came back, they found the design on the left. What's up with that? Like that looks way different than the one on the right. And so what we've been doing is structuring out some resources that include both the story of kind of how we're thinking about this phenomenon launch beginning, and then putting out some free resources that you might use with your students, or you might download the Google Slides and adapt it for your local context. So I'm just going to walk through this story. So like, first we've got to think about bees. Like, what do we know about them? Jot down anything we know about bees. It can be simple, a word, a sentence, more. Like, let's just start thinking. So like, this is going to give us the context of what we're trying to even be thinking about. Most students, wouldn't come in today randomly thinking about bees. So this is going to help us focus. Like now we got to look closer. Not everyone's seen a bee up close. They're fast, they fly. Some people are allergic. Some are scared of bees. Some bees are scary based on how they're flying. So like, let's just look at these and see like, huh, so none of these look like that weird one, but like they do have this little this shape to these little holes. There's certainly lots of them. The one in the tree, like I've seen a hive that looks like a ball, but not like that design. And then thinking about the bees, like what does a beehive look like and why? This is our first time really unpacking our thinking. Like why would it be in that weird hive shape? Why would some be in a tree, some be in a box? And then describe why you think a hive has certain features, and relate these structures, so using those cross-cutting concepts, to how you think a bee uses its hive. And so feel free to use words or drawings to share your thinking. So this would be our initial model of like, how could we connect the structure, what the beehive looks like, with the function of that hive? Because there's got to be something. And so how could we pull out students' thinking and capture that here? So then what's up with this hive? Beekeeper forgot to put the frame. The bees just went and they just like freestyled, and somehow they came up with this. Like this is a very interesting design. So let's dig deeper into what's happening with this version. And then using that image, what do you notice? What do you observe? What do you wonder about? And then why do you think the bees built this type of structure for their hive? So this is the first time that we're coming up with an initial explanation for the structure and function of this hive. And then where do I go next? So like it doesn't end there. You know, that's just your initial explanation. So what questions do we need to start investigating to understand how this works? How can we start learning more? So this is really planning what we could do next, like planning our investigations and other practice. Can you think of another time in your life when you had to think about the way the structure of something is related to its function? So like that brings in that personal connection of like, yeah, like I was trying to undo like a sofa bed to get into it, and the structure of the sofa bed was like way different than my other couch. So like, but that one opens up and the other one doesn't, and it's way lighter, and that sofa one's way heavier. So like something specific in your life that you might have just noticed, or I have a mountain bike that's way different than the bike I had when I was a kid. So like why do they look so different? And then share your thinking with another person. What questions can you help each other understand? What new questions do you have? And so science is social. A lot of times I have a few questions in my head, but once other people start sharing their questions, I both steal their questions. I'm like, wow, that's like what I wanted to ask, but you put it in a much better way. That's a better question. I'm going to run with that. Or people have their own lived experiences, and so they bring their own experiences into a scenario that you may never have thought of something that way. You know, somebody else does a ton of camping, and like when you put the tent back together, it like forms a structure that's like expandable. And maybe bees are about building on and expanding their hive over time. And so bringing that social piece in, you got to talk to somebody, even if in this case it's over Zoom, it's calling a friend, it's posting on a chat board to share your questions, however you can do it. So some recommended actions that you can take, and this is both in the classroom and right now while we're virtually teaching, is really focus on sense making. And so, we're of course trying to make sense of phenomena and solve problems in the world through engineering. But sense making is a process and a pursuit rather than an end unto itself. And so, we're always trying to make sense of more things. I constantly see something, or I'm watching a YouTube video, and right when it's about to explain why that thing happens, I pause it, shut the computer, like, give me a couple days. Let me think about that. Like, I really want to see if I have the tools or the ideas, even if they're missing some full explanations, to like, let me see if I can explain that before I get more information about it. And then making sense of observations and data is at the crux of what scientists do. We want students doing science, and that is one of the major focuses of NGSS phenomena, is the doing of the science. And so I am often, I'm no longer there right now, but working every Friday, we're in a school with our elementary method students, and we do science with students. We talk about ways to approach it, and then we walk down the hallway and we try to figure out, like, what's up with insect mouths? Why do all insects not eat the same stuff? So like, let's zoom in and figure out what we need to know or what insects we need to look at to figure out like, why do mosquitoes eat blood, but dragonflies can catch stuff on the wing versus like, where even is a worm's mouth? Like, we know that's not an insect, but like, they're in the ground. How do they eat anything? I've never seen a worm's mouth. And using the practices. And so right now, you know, when everyone's at home, everyone's trying to think about ways to build resources or ways to get their students asking questions, or thinking about designing investigations. And so I'm really pushing for science notebooking as a fantastic tool to get students doing science rather than just trying to span some time. Thinking about assessment, we can 100% look at a student's science notebook and tell exactly what they're thinking. And I also really like it because it's authentic. Through doing all of my research, I did songbird research in England, Ireland, Scotland. I've got stacks that I still have with me of science notebooks that I just, you know, have a bunch of ideas, and a lot of those ideas are wrong. A lot of them are, I wonder if that bird is calling only at this time of day because of this. And then right after it might be a bunch of data or observations that I saw, might be drawing where a limpet was stuck on a rock. But it is really a window into somebody's eyes, and it doesn't need to be digital online. It can just be a stack of papers. It can be recycled notebooks. Like, I'm sure everyone has a notebook where you wrote on the first 2 pages and then you forgot about it. And so this is even an example. This image on the slide is an example from one of my students in my elementary science methods course. And we're focusing on the practices. Like, let's think about anything that's happening right now, anything, and you can see what effect, if any, does drastically changing temperatures, warm, freezing, have on the environment, on plants? Why do worms always come out when it rains? I notice a lot of them end up dying. You know, do dogs dream? What do they dream about? From a biological standpoint, why do humans feel good when they're outside? And so, like, you can really get the window into like some really interesting questions. And we've now shifted to thinking, okay, so without Googling, how could we start to investigate these? What questions can we investigate, and what questions are just kind of those more philosophical questions? And the other big thing, I shared Twitter because, like, especially right now in our lives, we need community. And so we're really trying to build community, albeit virtually, but people sharing what they're doing and things that they've found. And so, not trying to call any of these people out, but they're doing awesome stuff. Looking at the Leidenfrost effect, the adorable kid on the right was doing the M&M experiment from the Phenomena Virtual Science page, like really looking to think about that. Top left, thinking about like selfies, like why do some selfies come out really well and some are like washed out? So like, how can that help us think about light? And then evidence of ancient rainforests found in Antarctica. For like, is that evidence for continental drift, climate change? Like, how could we use that? And so I'm going to shift for a second. And so what we've been trying to do is add some virtual science ed resources here. And this link will be in the slides as well. But just some different resources for thinking about different ways to get in. So you can see this center one, Good Selfies. Is that a science thing? That's a high school resource. Virtual SciEd for everybody. This is really about science notebooking. And so if you click on these, like I said, there is some like intro into what we might do. And then some like, isn't a science notebook the place where I write down everything the teacher says? Like, what am I supposed to do if there's no teacher? And so talking about the shift and going back to like when we asked a lot of questions, and then some examples of like what a science notebook has looked like in the past, how to get started, what to write down, and then how do I know if I'm doing it right? So what kind of things might I do to add into there? And so these just being different resources, we really didn't want to focus on the coronavirus because everyone's really, you know, with good cause, nervous about that, but there is a lot out there. And so we wanted to to give the resource if that's something that your students did want to observe. How can we use our space now? I mentioned our ecosystems shrinking. So how can we work with that? And then some elementary resources, like when you put them in warm water, the M's don't dissolve, but like the color dissolves and the M's somehow float to the top. Like what's up with that? What are the M's made out of? Another high school resource around like perception and information processing, because we're being given so much information now. So like, how do we work with that? And then what is a chemical reaction? Thinking about that for middle school, thinking about water for elementary. That's the B one that we've shared. And there are about 6 more that'll be coming out like probably within the next week based on things that people have shared and ideas that they've given. And so here are some links. And I can open it up for questions, comments.
TJ, there's a question in the chat from Carrie Bowers, which asked, how do you blend the notes like that with the need for skeleton notes or closed notes, etc.?
So we put that out there as a way to get started. But I also at the same time hope that that doesn't box anybody in. And so I like those as the idea for like posing those questions. But like I love any different version that students can use as long as they are capturing their thoughts. Other questions? I can stop. I see that it's in the chat. So I can stop sharing and see faces.
Feel free to type something into the chat if you guys have anything you want to share, ideas, questions. Betsy's got the comment that she has students tape, glue, staple those notes into their notebooks.
Yeah, I've been seeing so much about the unequal access to, there may be a one computer at the house, and I know for me personally, my science thinking is pretty asynchronous. Like I may be thinking about something totally random, and then wait, now I'm wondering about like, it's super sunny today, but it's so cold. What's up with that? And so I try to model that with students too, to get them realizing that there's not this like 1 hour window in the day that's science time. One of my favorite quotes, a student told me, she was a 2nd grader at a school in Dorchester in Boston. And she came up to me and she's like, they do science in the morning. Can you believe that? I was like, what? She's like, they do science in the morning and not like at the end of the day. Can you believe that? And she was saying it with some sass. And I'm like, why? When do you want to do science? She's like, at the end of the day, so I can go home with like questions all night into the next day. And it was like, was so beautiful that was her, like, she couldn't believe that they started with science and then you had to do other stuff. Like she wanted to end with these questions and wondering and spend her night thinking about those science ideas. And so I think that science notebooking is a way, and it's authentic. It's what researchers do. It's, what I do now, going and observing classrooms and thinking about different ideas. So like, it's also talk about literacy, getting students writing, getting students drawing and labeling, like that. It does more than just capture science thoughts.
And if you're reading the chat there.
Yes.
Okay.
See the one, what recommendations do you have for developing that storyline from the phenomenon? And another one, are there groups of communities that are working together to build these storylines like the Illinois group? There are, I think a lot, like we just built a resource out that, and I know Abe Lowe's joining this week, that builds off of the work that they've done in the middle school sound unit, because there's like a lot of us are saying we're dealing with music. You know, everyone's at home with headphones on, or trying to play music, playing the radio. So we build off of their thinking on vibrations and build it into an Earth and space science unit storyline, where like people are seeing with volcanoes, or people that are studying earthquakes, that like less people outside, there's less vibrations on the planet. So like, how crazy is that? That the planet itself is not vibrating as much as it is because we're all home, or a lot of us are home. And we're also building one that isn't as directed with the content, but is a tool or a way to think about connecting phenomena. And so of course we're calling it 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, but really to focus in on like, how do you get from one starting phenomenon to your Kevin Bacon phenomenon, that end thing that you want to get to, and then like what is the arc of the story, or how do we tell that story to help us hit like, who are the major players, who are the characters that are going to help us get from one to the next. And that might be, you know, one character might be this weird thing that's happening with population dynamics, or like, I'm seeing tons more birds outside. Is that just because I'm looking more, or are there actually more birds because everyone's inside? And so like showing those little pieces that'll help, you know, whether it's called chapters, or I know the, in our next gen storyline work, called them bends to the story. So it doesn't really matter what it is, but like, how do we get students to be the ones that are making those connections in a coherent storyline across the way? And I know I hear a lot on this question about, it's easy for elementary but harder for high school. What's your response, especially chemistry? That one always makes me giggle, because like high school chemistry teachers are full of amazing ideas for phenomena that they like can just rattle off all these different, like, oh, I can do this and that and this and that. And so it's really just stepping back and thinking about the story. Like, what are we talking about? You know, when we're doing titrations, are we talking about acid rain? Or are we talking about like balancing? Like the balancing the equations is something that helps us think about things. But it's just like, you know, people that look into the framework and see, oh my God, there's no PV equals nRT, or there's no like gas laws. I Googled gas laws, or I did, you know, an Apple F in the framework, and it doesn't mention gas laws. Like, gas laws are a helpful model to think about molecular motion, but like when we're thinking about true disciplinary core ideas, the core idea is like molecules do weird stuff when like there's different situations. We warm them up, we put them in a container and crush that container, make it smaller, and only then do you have your students saying like, I wonder if there's a way to think about this, like the relationship between pressure and temperature over time. That's where that just-in-time instruction comes in, where you do need to give them something to think about. I think it's a misnomer when people think I'll give an example. I was working with a group at UConn, and a middle school teacher was saying, she's like pulling her hair out as we're trying to build this unit, and like, what's going on? What's the matter? She's like, I'm not sure how to get kids to come up with the idea of Mendel. And I remember laughing and thinking like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, like they need to know about Mendel, but like, if I'm not allowed to tell them anything, how are they going to come up with Mendel? And like, that is hilarious. Like, students are never going to randomly think like, I bet there was a weird monk that like played with peas and came up with this stuff that was like really useful. Like, that's something that when the kids are like, oh, like all of these different genes have all these different things. Like, are there genes where there's like one set that we can find out if it does this thing or it does this thing? It's wrinkly or if it's yellow. Like, that's when the students are begging for the information about Mendel, and that's, you know, the time for just-in-time instruction. I can actually, I think I have the primer that I can drop in the chat if you haven't seen that. That's a resource from Ambitious Science Teaching. I know they talk about it in the book as well.
While you're looking for that Ambitious Science Teaching, Mark Winshuttle will be our keynote speaker at our conference in September.
Awesome. There you are. I put it in there. And it is this book. They recently, like the just-in-time instruction is part of this work that they've written up, and they're already working on the second one because there's like so many ideas that weren't fully captured in there. But I feel like the just-in-time instruction has a great chart that talks about the do's and the don'ts that really shows you when, like, I always think of it as you don't want to steal your students' aha. So like, when do you give them the Mendel data set for them to work when they're trying to figure out something bigger that they then do still have that aha at the end. And I can share the slides. I can put them in the chat right now. Do you see other questions, Scott, while I'm doing this?
Let's see here. I was answering a couple questions. Kelly, I'm going to slaughter your last name. She works for the Nebraska Game and Parks. Was wondering about applying phenomenon on a nature hike for like short program type things and not a classroom setting.
Applying them, or like how to think about phenomena via a nature hike. All right, there's the slides.
So it's looking for ideas on how to use the process, but in a short program where the participants could literally each discover a dozen different things.
So I think that really gets to what the larger question is. And so like I've done, with my master's in entomology, we've done a ton around using streams to figure out, like, is this stream clean or dirty? Like, it looks gross. And when we get in it, it's super muddy. And like, how can we figure out if this is a clean stream or a dirty stream with nets and buckets and go? And like having students explore and find different things. Of course, the first couple minutes is a lot of squealing and like gross and finding this one thing and this smells weird. But then once we start to compile stuff, that's where it goes back to like, what is the story that we're trying to tell? Like, okay, so by going on this nature hike or going on the that stream study or whatever you're doing, what's the evidence that we could collect to help us make some sort of claim by the end? And so I'm always focused on the evidence because I think the initial question, or like if I go back to the beehive, looking at that beehive is like the first things that I think of, or that students would probably think of, are like, it looks super weird, but like, is that better? Somehow the bees didn't do the lines. And so there must be something about like, maybe it's airflow, maybe it's temperature regulation, maybe like it's surface area. Maybe they're like way smarter than us and they're like, straight lines is silly. Like if we do this squirrely design, there are going to be a lot more places for us to, or places to have honey or put baby bees. And so I think of it as, if it's a good phenomenon, it gets all of our science ideas out. Like maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, on the table. Even in the wrong ones, we need the wrong ones, because sometimes the wrong ones are more helpful or get us further and then we need to find evidence. So thinking about the nature hike, I would say, like, thinking about what is the question that you want students to be able to answer using the evidence they find by the end. And then that would direct where I'm headed, if that makes sense. I know it's tough to talk in generalities.
Thank
I always
you.
think of, it does?
That made sense. Thank you.
All right. I always think of like, and I shudder at the idea, at the question around misconceptions. And I know nobody asked this question, but I'm always thinking about it, that like wrong ideas are helpful a lot of times. And like, we're all walking around with a lot of misconceptions. I always use the example of suction. A lot of people they think that you can suck things and you can suck juice up your straw, or you have a vacuum cleaner, you can suck up dirt into the vacuum cleaner. But like air can only push. And so suction isn't real. No, suction cups don't suck onto the window. And like, that's a misconception or a partial idea that we've walked around with for most of our lives. And I think most of us are okay. We've been able to survive. But thinking about like the fact that it's actually atmospheric pressure pushing down on liquids that shove it up the straw into your mouth, like that's not what a lot of us were taught when we're thinking about air pressure. And so the faster we can get all of the students' ideas on the table, the faster we can figure out what kind of evidence we need to go find or to research or to dig into, to then think about which science ideas can we back up and which ones do we have no evidence for.
So the only two comments that I see that we haven't maybe addressed directly, Taylor was asking about, are there any resources you would point somebody to if they're trying to make storylines from phenomenon?
There's a lot of like the next gen storylines, and I know later this week with OpenSciEd and iHub, they do a lot around making storylines. The trick right now is the storylining is a very social thing, and so you need a lot of people to work together to build these out. I've been involved in some of the middle and high school storylines, and there's a new one around roadkill that I think is coming out soon. That's a matter and energy through ecosystems unit. But the storylines take a lot of time, and some of them, the high school one I was involved with, is like 377 pages. And so we've been thinking of these phenomena launches as smaller chunks, something that might be currently more doable for those that are at home trying to do science. And we've been trying to think of it more as the quality over quantity, which obviously all of those are high quality resources, but we're starting to link them together. In terms of the storylines, I really try to step back. And one of the things that they say in the ambitious science teaching, and I know Mark has always said it, that like you have to sit down and write the explanation. Like if you're thinking about the tick and the possum and the deer story, like there's so much to that story that I would need to sit down and articulate like what is the full explanation that I would want my students to be able to explain by the end. And then there's and then I would go in and color code the science ideas and split that up into my storyline. Because like your story is the thing that you want students to be able to put together by the end. And you almost need to work backwards. Thinking UBD, let's write the full explanation, then break up the chunks. And when you're breaking up the chunks, it starts to make sense for like, oh, this is the beginning part of the story. Because like if I don't know what a tick is, or like what the deer's doing, or like what a possum even is, what his teeth look like what else do they eat? Are they only nocturnal? Like those kind of things would be in the first third of my story. And then I would need to think about like, well, what else is happening in the ecosystem that might be impacting this? Do they hibernate? Are deer covered in ticks? Are these only deer ticks, or are they Lyme disease ticks? And then like, how do I put the pieces together? And so ambitious science teaching talks about that, pressing for evidence-based explanations. Like, how do we push for that to be the end part of the story? And you'll see that in all of the OpenSciEd, the iHub, in the next gen storylines work. Like you'll see that there's like a beginning part to the story, a middle part, and an end, just like a good book, a good novel that we're reading. But you have to get through the mud first to then start to see like, oh, these are the main ideas that we need to focus on.
The other one I see is Tracy Inzer, who works for one of our extension offices, was talking about forming a support group for informal educators. Do you know of anything out there that they might be able to tap into?
There are some out there. I think a lot. I think through Aztec, the Association for Science Technology Centers, they have a lot of resources, and offhand, I don't have a ton, but I was formerly, I was at the Connecticut Science Center for 9 years, and we did just that. When kids would come on the field trips, we would very quickly, in a 45-minute lab, frame the phenomenon, the thing that we're trying to figure out, and then do the lab, and at the end have students try to answer the question or relate back to the initial phenomenon. And it'd be silly things like with elementary kids, like is a cat a liquid, and all these cute pictures of cats taking the shape of their container, you know, melting into this shape in a bowl and all that. And the kids would always laugh and think it's hilarious. And then they like couldn't come up with ideas at the beginning. And then by the end, they could say whether or not they believed that was the case. And so it is definitely tougher in informal setting to get to that. But I also think there's so much around informals that like they're banks of phenomena, you know, whether it's, you know, a injured owl that we're looking at, whether it's a environment that we're looking at, an ecosystem, or like a science center of any size, they're full of phenomena. Like every exhibit is something that you could ask questions about.
If there's nothing else, thank you very much, TJ, for coming out and spending the last hour with us.
Yes, thank you.
And we will have, I've downloaded the links to all of your stuff, and we will make sure that that's all shared out on our website. And as soon as we get the video, we did record this session and we'll post it up onto our website as well. And it'll be through a YouTube link, so you guys can share that out.
Great. And if I could find some other links for informal, I'll send those to you, Scott. And so you can add
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. For those of you who are still in the room, we have 4 more sessions this week, which are phenomenal. Tomorrow is Kate Henson with iHub Biology, Inquiry Hub, High School Storylines. And I've used those, and I definitely think that they are a really good tool to use. You've mentioned Abe Lowe is coming on Thursday. Kathy Renfrew is actually sitting in this room. She's on Friday with some elementary stuff. And Oki Lee is on Wednesday. So thank you guys for hanging out. And if you guys have anything else, we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, TJ.